invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akeredunwale. The headlines. The deal is back on track as Russia resumes a role, but President Putin says Moscow reserves the right to quit the Black Sea Initiative. The Pentagon anticipates delivering drone-killing vampires to Ukraine by the mid of 2023. And U.S. officials are divided over intel suggesting a Russian military discussed scenarios for using nuclear weapons. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow reserves the right to withdraw again from a Turkish brokered grain shipment deal that it had returned to, but that if it did so, it would not impede grain shipments from Ukraine to Turkey. In televised remarks, Mr. Putin says in return for rejoining the agreement, Russia had demanded and received guarantees that Ukraine would not launch attacks from parts of the Black Sea covered by the deal.
Unfortunately, Ukraine used this humanitarian corridor in attempts to strike the Russian Black Sea fleet. In this regard, we decided to halt our participation in these grain convoys. We demanded assurances and guarantees from the Ukrainian side that nothing like this would happen again, that the humanitarian corridors would not be used militarily. Our defense ministry has received information from the Turkish side that Ukraine has given such assurances. In this regard, I have instructed the Defense Ministry to resume our participation in this work. However, Russia reserves the right to withdraw from these agreements if these guarantees are breached by Ukraine. In any case,
earlier, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said a Russian jet fired 2 cruise missiles that flew over the Black Sea corridor being used to export Ukrainian grain. Russia had said on Wednesday that it would resume its participation in the deal, freeing up grain exports from Ukraine, reversing a move that world leaders had warned would increase hunger globally.
Цього ранку російський літак запустив крилаті ракети неподалік.
Every time the Russian blackmail intensifies, food prices get more expensive. And every time the world does not succumb to this blackmail, agricultural products become cheaper. And if there was no Russian attack on Ukraine, there would not even be a ghastly threat of a global food crisis. Because every Russian missile that strikes our ports, grain elevators, power plants that provide power to our agricultural industry ultimately affects the living standard of tens of millions of people in many countries. These are Egypt, Algeria, Somalia, Sudan, Lebanon, Bangladesh, India, China, Indonesia, Vietnam. This year, they overpaid tens of billions of dollars for food.
And staying with the grain deal, a senior Ukrainian official says Russia is resuming participation to free up grain exports from Ukraine because it realized the initiative would still work without the involvement of the Kremlin. Presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak says Moscow's decision showed that Russian blackmail and escalation and threats failed when they meet a resolute response. Another senior Ukrainian official says Moscow's decision was mainly a result of Turkish pressure on Russia. And speaking about that, the Ukrainian president thanked Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan for his active participation in preserving the grain deal after Russia said it would rejoin the agreement. Mr. Zelensky said in a Telegram post that during a phone call with Mr. Erdogan, he also thanked his Turkish counterpart for his, quote, strong support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky adds that they also discussed further steps for the return of captured political prisoners. He said, quote, Turkey's support is important for us in this matter. And Ukraine is expected to soon receive a number of so-called vampire counter-drone systems. That's according to a Pentagon press secretary, Pat Ryder, who confirmed Washington's commitment to supply Kiev with the air defense capabilities. The statement comes amidst Russia's continued strikes targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Speaking to reporters, Ms. Ryder said the U.S. government had yet to secure a contract for the laser-guided missile launchers, but expects one to be reached within the next few months. The Vampire, or Vehicle-Agnostic Modular Palletized ISR rocket equipment, can be installed on the cargo bed of almost any civilian truck and uses laser-guided munitions capable of hitting both ground and airborne targets, including unmanned aerial vehicles. And Russia failed to get the United Nations Security Council to establish a formal inquiry into its accusation that the United States and Ukraine have biological weapons programs in Ukraine, a claim that both Washington and Kiev deny. Only China voted with Russia in favor of a draft Security Council resolution on the measure. The United States, Britain, and France voted against it, while the other 10 Council members abstained. UN disarmament officials have long said they are not aware of any biological weapons programs in Ukraine. Russia has raised the issue of chemical and biological weapons in Ukraine several times at the Security Council since its forces invaded Ukraine on February the 24th.
The United States and Ukraine went through Russia's allegations in Geneva point by point and debunked every single one. Russia knows our cooperative threat reduction efforts are not for military purposes. We know Russia knows this because for nearly 2 decades, Russia participated in this very kind of cooperation with us, including on biological threats.
As such, the Russian Federation's complaint has no validity. We do not see the proposed investigation by the Council as either justifiable or useful. We have therefore abstained in the vote on the resolution that the Russian Federation has brought to Council.
Russia claimed that the United States and Ukraine and their allies failed to consider the evidence they presented. This is completely false. Russia's allegations of US and Ukrainian biological activities were given a full hearing in September under Article 5 of the Convention. At that meeting, Ukraine and the USA provided a comprehensive response to Russia's allegations. The UK shared its own extensive technical analysis of the evidence Russia presented. Russia's allegations have no credible basis in fact.
Let's talk now to Stephen Hayes, President Emeritus of the Corporate Council on Africa, former President, American Center on International Leadership, and President Founder, Cohen and Woods International. Thank you for your time, Stephen. Welcome. And let me start by saying a very special thank you. I know the time difference means that you've got to get up very, very early to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you again. Thank you, Lottie.
Let's look at this grain deal. Why do you think Russia returned to it? Was it because of pressure from Turkey, or was it because it feared that it would go on with or without its participation, or because it still expects that on its side, the part of it that says it can export fertilizer and some agricultural products would be implemented, perhaps?
Well, I think, of course, I don't think the deal could have gone on without Russia, but I think there's 2 factors. One is Turkey's influence. Who knows what was said between Erdogan and the Russians. But also, I think that global pressure or global image right now. Russia is very concerned, understandably, about its image and its propaganda in this war, and they can't afford to be seen as depriving the rest of the world, particularly the poor, particularly in Africa as well, of food. So I think there's a PR pressure, and I think that Turkey has a lot of influence right now, particularly on shipping and on future relations with Russia and the Black Sea.
Now, before Ukraine was invaded by Russia, President Erdogan himself was under considerable Western pressure, but he has gone from that to becoming the key power player in this crisis. How do you think he managed that transition to being friendly to the Ukrainians. I mean, you had Volodymyr Zelensky thanking him for his role. You have the Russians talking to him. You have the West talking to him. And he seems to be the pivot on which all this is resting. How did he manage that transition, you think?
Well, I think geopolitics has a big part in this. Is simply the location of Turkey as being the choke point to the Black Sea, which the Russians badly need to keep open. So his relationship with Russia certainly is getting much more influence with the West. His relationship with the West makes him, if not quite ideal, but certainly close to ideal, fulcrum for the Russians as well. I think that he's played the game very, very well.
Let me bring you to the United States. The United States, of course, is on the ground, the key player in all of this, even though it doesn't have boots there yet and doesn't plan to. But it's the biggest aid supplier, it's the biggest weapons supplier to Ukraine, and many have gone as far as to say without the United States, Ukraine would have lost already. Russia would be in control. But now something is going on in the United States itself, talking about the midterms, and I remember that when I spoke to you last, we did talk a bit about this. It's transpired, of course, that the Republicans have indicated that if they take control of one or both houses of Congress, they might dial back, you know, the robust support that Ukraine has been enjoying from the United States. Does it look like they're going to take control, you think?
Depends on the polls. I think it's still anyone's guess, frankly. The polling should suggest that, yes, they're going to take over the House. Perhaps hold on to a majority of the Senate. I think it's going to be very, very close. But you're right. The advertising that the Republicans have put on television here in the United States have made Ukraine a particular point. Very critical of President Biden for putting money into the 66 billion, is the Republican quote, putting money into Ukraine. This, to me, it's almost unfathomable that they're doing this. I don't think it's something that all Republicans believe in, but nevertheless, it is going to put a lot of pressure. The system here, though, even if the Republicans win the House, Biden still has a veto. If the Republicans do win, it's going to be it's going to be a small margin again. And I think that there are at times wiser heads in the Senate as well. But Biden always has the veto, and he could continue, and I think will continue support for the Ukraine. And that veto is going to be much more important. So I wouldn't say that with the Republicans coming in, it's necessarily going to pull back on support for the Ukraine, but it will be an indicator, too, of some public opinion, and how much the Biden administration reacts to that is another question.
The other thing, of course, is that this situation in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, has ignited or brought to the forefront quite a number of other things. Yesterday, there was an exchange of missiles between North and South Korea, and North Korea has nuclear weapons. It said it has nuclear weapons, and I think the international powers believe that it does as well. But South Korea is directly under the protection of the United States. So if the North and the South enter into any kind of conflict, the United States is going to be directly involved in that. Are you worried that one way or the other, nuclear weapons are coming to feature in our world of today, especially with the fact that there's no going back once they get used?
It's hard to believe that anybody is insane enough to use nuclear weapons, but the fact is that when you have a global leader like Putin talking openly about the possibility of using them, then yes, there's a big danger. I think you are also right that the most vulnerable point right now in nuclear weapons is not necessarily Ukraine, but North Korea. My Japanese contacts who work high there as well should say, work high up in the government structures, also are very concerned about that possibility. So I think that's another area. If North Korea does do something, then China is obligated to support North Korea, and there we have it. I think we're well on the way to a nuclear disaster if that happens.
Well, you did talk about the fact that anyone who did actually go ahead and use nuclear weapons would have to be insane. And I'm happy you mentioned the fact that China is obligated to support North Korea while the United States is obligated to support South Korea. So even if at the very start of it, it doesn't look like that, but inevitably that's what's really happening if the North and South, who have not, by the way, declared a cessation of hostilities since 1953, when some kind of peace was established, are still at it. So we might actually have that as a flashpoint. But as you say that, I want you to talk about Taiwan, which is just down the road, if you like, from there, where, again, the United States is obligated to defend, and President Biden has reinforced that, Taiwan. But China says that it will not renounce the use of force, and the man who has been insisting has just gotten himself a third term in office.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a big risk. I still, perhaps I'm becoming an increasing minority, but I still don't believe that China would directly invade Taiwan. They've had a very long-term strategy. It's been part of the Chinese culture, but the fact is there are changes within the balance of power within China now because of that third term, and so there is that risk. One of the reasons I think that China, besides culture and history, will not directly invade Taiwan. And again, I could be very, very wrong these days because the world is very much askew. Taiwan makes about 50% of the world's semiconductors, which are essential for computers. So, that says quite a bit. I don't think China would undermine that. Any invasion would add enormous destruction. It's almost self-defeating for China to do something like that. But on the other hand, history, ego, all play into this, and it's just very difficult to predict. In fact, if anybody could predict it, then we wouldn't have worries. We'd know what to do on the future. So I think we're at one of the most unstable points, if not the most unstable points in global history that we've had. You could argue that the World War I, the start of World War I, was similar. There were so many alliances that required nations to come in and defend one act or another. And the fact that a whole world war could be started on the assassination of one person in Serbia, I think it was at the time.
Yes.
It just brings us back to this point.
Now, I want to also draw your mind to and see how you're looking at it, because even though there's all this saber rattling and there are all these threats from various quarters, trade is still going on massively between the United States and China. So one is wondering where is the balance in all of this? Because even though there is this so much potential for conflict, on the other hand, there's this so much potential and actual reality of making a great deal of money. Chinese companies and government have a lot at stake in the U.S. economy and the other way around.
Mm-hmm. I think they're mutually dependent upon one another, very frankly. It's a codependence that is unparalleled anywhere in the world. I think that one's economy simply cannot do without the other. I think that global trade will go on. I think that, but your point is right. I think the most important thing, and I think to me the most hopeful point between the U.S. and China right now, is that trade relationship continues. I would like us to tone down, frankly, the rhetoric on China as the main enemy. I think it's certainly the main competitor, but it doesn't necessarily have to make us as enemies. But then this reverts back to the Russian relationship that China has in all of this as to how that is going to be managed in the future as well. So I think that the management of the Chinese-U.S. relationship is just absolutely vital.
You are in Rhode Island, Stephen, and I wanted to, I mean, yesterday the news flashed across the world that interest rates went up again. I believe they are now at a 14-year high in the United States. I'm wondering, the last time I spoke to you, I asked you about this in terms of the economics on the ground, not just the reporting, and I know you know so much, much more than most about this. What exactly is the situation removing the politics? Is the economic situation really as tough as we seem to hear it is with all the cost of living crisis, particularly the cost of energy?
Well, it's tough because the cost of living is going up. Groceries, especially, again, our own food supply, and I can only judge that best from the United States of what's going on right now. It's certainly it's more manageable in the U.S. than it is many parts of the world. So I think that I've got to be careful on how I word this, because in fact it is easier still in the United States, but the hardships are increasingly on the poor, and there's going to be a strong middle class pinch as well. Gasoline prices are actually being handled fairly well. There's a lot of people in the United States who wouldn't agree with me on that, but compared to what's happening around the rest of the world, the other prices, the United States is still in a better shape than most. But this is going to have a pinch on more than a pinch, I suppose, in some areas of the world on not simply the quality of living, but living itself. And I think Africa is going to be a big test of that as well. But not simply Africa, there's all other parts of the world. But the poor in any country are getting heavily hit right now, and it's a concern. And I think, and as is the working class and middle class. So I think that's also a big reason of tensions and political divisions in the United States, and it's obviously in other parts of the world as well.
I'll be very interested as we see those pictures of the Americans at grocery stores there. I'll be very interested in seeing what you think or what you make of this when we have the full results out after the midterm elections, and how that could impact both the war in Ukraine and other things. Yeah. You want to say something?
Very, very interesting. Thank you.
It will be. Now, Stephen, I want to again thank you so much for your time and for taking the time out to join us this early in the morning from Rhode Island in the United States. I hope you have a pleasant day ahead in spite of its early start.
Well, thank you, and good luck to you too as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And after the break, wheat and corn prices fall after Russia announces it will resume participation in the Black Sea grain deal. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. The United States State Department has announced that the Biden administration has approved the potential sale of approximately $535 million in guided multiple launch rocket systems to Finland. The approval comes as Finland awaits approval by Turkey and Hungary to join NATO. Helsinki's move to join the defense alliance was prompted by Russia's war in Ukraine. This proposed sale will support the foreign policy and national security of the United States by improving the security of a trusted partner, which is an important force for political stability and economic progress in Europe. That's according to a notice from the State Department, which also says it is vital to the U.S. national interest to assist Finland in developing and maintaining a strong and ready self-defense capability. And the head of Ukraine's railways has vowed to keep trains running and to repair the damage done to the network by Russian troops, highlighting how rail is the lifeblood of the country and how it would help to restore towns devastated during the invasion. Alexander Kamyshin, chief executive of Ukrainian Railways, spoke as he traveled by train through the Kupiansk railway hub, once used by Russian troops to resupply their front line before the area was liberated by Ukrainian troops.
Got dozens of thousands of damages to railway infrastructure. But whatever happens around, we find a way how we can fix it and keep running. Definitely, full recovery will take years. And definitely, it will take significant funds. But so far, we have to find a way how we can fix it in a fast way and get back to operations. It's important to restore connectivity, railway connectivity to retaken cities, because that brings life back to cities. Once we restore passenger service, we search a way how we can restore cargo service, because cargo, that's exports, that's what gives the blood, what gives the funds to the country.
Prices of wheat and corn on global commodities markets have fallen after Russia reversed course and said it will rejoin a deal to allow vital grain exports from Ukraine to pass through the Black Sea. Wheat futures on the Chicago Board of Trade fell 6.3% to $8.45 a bushel. Corn futures fell 1.93% to $6.84 a bushel. The move reverses sharp gains in the price of both commodities earlier on in the week after Russia suspended its participation in the deal over the weekend. Ukraine and Russia together account for nearly a third of global wheat exports, and the grain deal has played a crucial role in lowering the price of wheat and other commodities globally. After reaching a record high in March, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's Global Food Price Index has declined for 7 months in a row. Last week, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says renewal of the Black Sea Initiative was crucial to avoid a global food crisis. Let's talk now to Laddie Williams of our business desk, who joins me on the program. A morning to you, Laddie.
Good morning. Good news.
Yes, good news. I was going to say that. Really good news. Although the fly in the ointment is that Russia says it can pull out at any point again.
Any point in
But
time.
for now, it's in. So the prices are going back.
Yeah. So for now, you know, we'll take that. They're back in. So, yeah, you know, tensions are easing now. So there's, you know, every chance that the countries that rely on Ukraine for grains are going to still keep getting, you know, grains going forward. So, you know, the much feared food crisis, you know, is averted, you know, with this. But at the end of the day, there's still, you know, little, that caveat is still there. So everyone is still watching, you know, closely. But the grains are moving out. And now, you know, last time we talked about, you know, insurers not able to, you know, give cover. But now, you know, with that risk aside, the insurers can give cover for, you know, exports.
At reasonable prices and possibly
reasonable prices. So all of that, you know, tension is eased now, which is good for,
indeed,
you know, countries like
yeah,
Africa,
I was talking to Stephen Hayes earlier on the program, and I asked him about this Federal Reserve jacking up the interest rates, 14-year highs, and as you said earlier on the previous edition of the program, smaller increases are expected after that.
Yes.
But how is that playing out?
That's what we were expecting, but obviously 75 basis points, that was expected. But one thing I noticed while Jerome Powell was actually giving that speech yesterday, one of the reporters there asked him that how does he feel, you know, that the market is actually rallying while he's speaking and while they just, you know, raise the rates. And he goes on to say, you know what? We're still going to keep going higher, you know, with our rate hikes if inflation, you know,
doesn't come down.
Keeps going up. And immediately the markets responded to that. It started going down. We saw the U.S. NASDAQ, that dropped about 3.3%, you know, from the session highs. Same thing in Europe. All the markets, you know, reacted negatively. And we also saw, you know, Bitcoin fall from a 20,700 high to about 20K. So that 20K is still held, but we're seeing a little recovery, you know, this morning. But at the end of the day, you know, investors were expecting some kind of dovish, you know, comment. That did not come.
That didn't happen.
Yeah, so, yeah, at the end of the day, we know the markets don't like rate hikes and future
Yeah, and promises of future rate hikes.
Yeah.
But more globally, how did the markets do?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, we saw Europe also, come down the red. We saw the FTSE. The FTSE was down. Also, Asian markets, because obviously we know once the U.S. Fed sneezes, markets, everywhere react. So at the end of the day, we've seen the 75 basis points. The chance of maybe a lower rate hike in the future, or maybe 50 basis points. Right now, we don't have that. But at the end of the day, we know it could change.
That's right.
Hopefully
I mean, the market conditions could change, necessitating something else.
Exactly, because we know the U.S. Fed now is looking for some bad economic news so that they know that their rate hikes have been working. So who knows? We might get that news before the next meeting.
Indeed. How's the Nigerian market doing?
Oh, so back here, we closed in the green yesterday, but big 1% jump. We saw stocks from Boa Cement, these ones raised the markets, even though we saw some tier one banking stocks
actually dropped. Yes, I noted that.
But the market was still able to, close in the green. Started intraday in the red yesterday, but it managed to close in the green. But we still see that downtrend.
Indeed.
In the market. This could be a dead cat bounce, maybe, but we're still watching the market. It's still
because we still got pressure today and tomorrow.
Yeah, there's still pressure, on the local bourse. Yeah, so at the end there's cautious optimism from what we saw yesterday.
Indeed. All right then, Ladi, thanks for that. Of course, Ladi will have more of this and indeed the other business stories on. Business Morning, and then later on Business Incorporated, Juliana, the Frankfurt Exchange.
The whole crew.
The whole crew. Everybody's going to be around. So thanks, Ladi.
Thank you.
Let's go on to some other stories. Nord Stream pipeline operators have said that the gas pipeline from Russia to Germany and into Europe has completed initial data gathering at the location of the pipeline damage on Line 1 in the Swedish exclusive economic zone. According to preliminary results, a technogenic created by human technology creators with a depth of 3 to 5 meters were found on the seabed at a distance of 248 meters from each other. The statement adds that the section of the pipeline between the craters is destroyed, indicating that analysis of the survey data continues. Last week, the pipeline operator said it was still waiting for approval to carry out a similar survey on the parts of pipeline damage in the Danish exclusive zone. All right, let's see if we can talk now to Chukwuemeka Eze, former lecturer, diplomatic and consular relations law at the Nasarawa State University. He joins us via Zoom from Enugu. Good morning to you, Mr. Eze. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, thank you.
Let's look at what we've been talking about mainly this day, the grain initiative. And let me get your view. Why do you think Russia returned to this deal?
I think Russia returned to the deal because of the intervention of the United Nations and Turkey, which is an ally to both the United States and Russia. So Turkey is a friend, and you are aware that Russia is fastly losing many of its friends, and Turkey has remained friendly. So if a friend talks to you, definitely you want to do something. Besides, Russia has this policy that it wouldn't take measures that will harm the most vulnerable African countries like Djibouti, Somalia, Ethiopia, and other countries in the Ogaden region, especially. But mostly African countries, Russia has a soft spot, but not to the extent that will endanger its defense interest or local population. So it had to return based on guarantees from Turkey and the United Nations.
Let me bring you over here to Africa, and I know that for many of people in your position, this is a sore point. We have been, and when I say we, I mean Nigeria and Africa, we have been spectators on this crisis. We're just looking. and we have been victims of the results of the crisis. The grain deal, many of the countries on the African continent, Ethiopia, Somalia, and so on, are beneficiaries of the grain deal. Why do you think that is so, beyond the usual fact that we can't speak we can't speak with one voice as a continent? Are there other reasons? Because I mean, we're not the only continent that can't speak with one voice. Many of the other continents too have dissenter countries within them. So why is it that Africa's own is so deep-seated that we can't even make comments that contribute positively to this?
Let me take it first from the Black Sea Grain Deal. Africa has spoken with one voice through the visit of the African Union president to Russia. So with that, in that respect, Africa has spoken as a unit. But with respect to the war, the various votings at the General Assembly, most African countries have voted in favor of Ukraine. But we need not lump ourselves directly into this war, because head or tail, many African countries like South Africa and many other East African countries benefited from Russia during their liberation struggle. So it will be saying, okay, we are ungrateful, we are ingrates. If now that you have a problem, a challenge, and we start speaking against you. So that's why even Russia, a place like South Africa is refusing last time to arrest a yacht of an oligarch from Russia. They refused and said they won't get involved. A country like Central African Republic, Mali, these are countries that have, Russia is helping currently in their security issues. So it will be difficult for them to come out to criticize Russia. So some other countries too, one way or the other, are affiliated to Russia, and they just want to be careful in handling this issue. So Europe, yes, the war, Ukraine is part of Europe. Russia is part of Europe. Europe can delve into it directly. But Africa doesn't have what it takes, because even the supply of grain might be stopped if it's coming to a particular country in Africa that is highly critical of Russia. So Russia has a role to play to stop supplies, and many African countries cannot feed themselves. We cannot feed ourselves to a large extent. So it is necessary that we play it down, that we don't delve directly into this conflict. It will be devastating for many African countries to do so.
The other part of this is, and I think I asked my last guest that question, how did Turkey become so pivotal to this situation? Turkey is friendly, as you pointed out, with the Russians. It's friendly with the Ukrainians. It's a member of NATO. It's also been spoken to by many of the big powers in Europe, Britain, France, Germany, and of course the United States. But how do you think President Erdogan played this diplomacy in such a way that he's now the go-to man in all of this? It seems as if nothing has moved except he is directly involved and his country is involved.
There is a strategic reason for that purpose. You recall that Turkey and United States were producing F-35 fighter together. At a point, the US hooked off, notwithstanding that both of them are NATO members. And by Article 5 of the NATO Convention, an attack on one is an attack on all. But after the misunderstanding, Turkey felt like looking elsewhere, and it began a romance with Russia and refused to stay under the complete satellite of the United States. I recall the coup that took place in Turkey, where the main suspect has been resident in US, and Turkey requested that he should be repatriated back to Turkey. Since then, Turkey has been looking away and has gone to visit Russia several times. I mean, the president of Erdogan has visited Russia several times to cement so many deals with Vladimir Putin. And with that, Russia sees Turkey as a friendly country. But Turkey has not left the NATO, so Turkey is playing both ways. Besides, historically, the Treaty of Severance of 1923 will be it was made for 100 years. And by next year, that treaty will be expiring. You know that Turkey has the Bosphorus Strait, where both Asia and Europe joins in terms of the sea. And Turkey will be playing a very, very vital role in determining movement of goods and the movement of ships between several continents of the world. So Turkey is a country that cannot be ignored in strategic positioning of the superpowers. That's why Turkey and Erdogan is waxing strong and strong and strong and strong.
Indeed, we will, of course, be looking more and more at Mr. Erdogan's role. But let me take you to the conflict itself, that is the theater of war, and look at the situation there. Of course, the West is backing Ukraine. Directly or indirectly, it is said that Iran, North Korea, and China are backing the Russians. There is the issue of nuclear weapons. Many of these countries have nuclear weapons, and in the case of Russia, it has indicated that, you know, if the conditions were right, it will use it, or it will use them. That has gotten everybody worried because, of course, nuclear weapons will have impact way beyond Ukraine and Russia. But do you think that this is all just bluff, and that at the end of the day, this conflict, generally speaking, will be resolved by sitting down? Or have we gone beyond that point that somebody has to emerge victorious militarily?
The question is in two segments. With respect to use of nuclear weapons, the Ministry of Defense in Russia has come out categorically to say that if its existence is threatened, it will walk away from the January 3, 2022 deal of the permanent powers of the United Nations, where they agreed not to use nuclear weapons. So it has set a condition by which it can use the nuclear weapons. So definitely it is on the card, but not to be immediately used, because as we speak, Russia has not felt that its existence is threatened. As for, I think the second segment of your question has to do with whether a party must win.
Yes.
Yes, whether a party, Russia intends to win this war, however it goes. The reason is that it is a test of its superpower status, and it wants to end the linear standing of the United States as the only power in the world. So this is a battle that Russia thinks it must win. But whether it will end on the diplomatic table, I don't know at what point that the parties will decide to sit down, because by the formation of the United Nations in 1945 on the maxim or cliche of never again. So I think the parties might get to a point that they will remember that the basis of forming of the United Nations is not to allow for sufficient human catastrophe. Because as we speak today, the 1949 Geneva Conventions have been violated. So even the additional protocol of protection of civilians in international armed conflicts has been severely violated, Articles 51 and 52. So the position is that, in my view, Russia is hell-bent on winning the war. And with the amount of damage they have caused, even in respect of civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, if they move it from the current 40% to 80%, then nothing will be left to salvage in Ukraine. And definitely Ukraine will surrender. But that is far-fetched for now, because the United States is still considering whether to supply more arms. But Russia has set up a red line. We don't know. In time of war, foul is fair and fair is foul. Let's watch and see what will play out. But I know that Russia is hell-bent on winning this war.
Indeed, Mr. Chukwemeka Eze, thank you very much for your time and for your perspective. We shall, of course, come back to you for more of this analysis in the days ahead. But for now, thank you and have a pleasant day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, viewers.
Still to come on the program, Spanish Foreign Minister hands over ambulances to Ukraine healthcare system. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Russian military officials have discussed how and under what conditions Russia would use a tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield in Ukraine, and that's according to a U.S. intelligence assessment. The assessment, drafted by the National Intelligence Council, is not a high-confidence product, and it's not raw intelligence, but rather analysis, according to multiple people who have read it. For that reason, some officials believe the conversations reflected in the document may have been taken out of context and do not necessarily indicate that Russia is preparing to use a nuclear weapon. The United States has still not seen any signs that Russian President Vladimir Putin has decided to take the drastic step of using one. But others within the administration who have viewed the document as well have reacted with concern because it provides a rare window into conversations between senior Russian generals and reveals their intensifying frustration about Russia's losses on the battlefield in Ukraine. Take a look at the sporting news here. RB Leipzig has thumped Ukraine's Shakhtar Donetsk 4-0 in Warsaw to qualify for the Champions League last 16 ahead of the Ukrainian side. Shakhtar Donetsk, playing their home games in Poland due to Russia's invasion of their country, had to settle for third place in Group F and a spot in the Europa League. Leipzig progressed as group runners-up behind Real Madrid, who secured top spot by thrashing Celtic 5-1. 4 candidates are in contention to become the new president of the National Olympic Committee of Ukraine after incumbent and former Olympic pole vault champion Sergei Bubka announced he would be stepping down from the position. Whoever wins this month's election will be leading Ukraine into the Paris 2024 Olympic Games while dealing with difficulties that come from the ongoing war in the country following the full-scale Russian invasion launched in February. The person will also be Ukraine's representative to the Olympic movement at a time when perhaps the biggest issue it faces is how to respond to the conflict. Most notable of the candidates is Vadim Gitsets, who is also the youth and sports minister in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the International Olympic Committee says it had distributed the same funds to international federations, including Ukraine, for the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games as it did for Rio 2016. A total of $540.29 million was allocated to the 28 sports regarded as part of the core Olympic program, with World Athletics topping the funding table with $39.48 million. However, only $522.98 million is actually being dished out, as the International Boxing Association's allocation has been withheld. And just before we go on the program, Spanish Foreign Ministry in a show of solidarity has arrived in Ukraine, in Kiev in particular, and handed over 30 ambulances to the Ukrainian healthcare authorities through the United Nations Population Fund. The ambulances will serve as mobile clinics and provide essential health services in remote areas. Jose Manuel Alvarez said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is first and foremost a humanitarian action.
The government of Spain, the people of Spain stand with Ukraine, and we must not forget that this illegal, brutal, unjust and unjustified war here against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people is above all a humanitarian drama. And they are partially thought for pregnant women, and we are sure that the babies that will be born during this period, they represent the future of a free and sovereign Ukraine. And thank you very much to United Nations for the work on the ground and to the Minister of Health for what they are doing in this very complicated situation.
help at the time of greatest need. That's how we wrap up the program. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akeri Kunwale. There are updates throughout the day, particularly within the world today at 5 o'clock. But for now, have a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.